I am Wes Roberts. I'm the executive publisher of SRQ Magazine. I am your co-moderator and co-host for the evening. On issues of great complexity, it is not uncommon for there to be no one right answer. The SRQ SB2 Rumbles are designed as a reminder that we can disagree mightily and then walk away friends. Based on a modified Oxford-style debate, SRQ Rumbles tackle challenging topics relevant to the Sarasota-Bradenton region by presenting a thoughtful for and against position on a motion that distills the topic. I like to think of it as polite and cultured, intellectual blood sport. It's winner take all in a battle of wits and ideas. The purpose of the SRQ Rumbles is to provide the community with articulate, well-researched presentations on both sides of the motion, structured around transparent, civil public discourse. Our brave volunteers will use their best facts and most persuasive rhetorical skills to build up their side of the argument and tear down that of their competition. Audience members should have either voted for or against the motion upon arrival. You will be given the chance to vote again for or against the motion at the end of the debate. The winner of the SRQ Rumble is determined by the team who sways the audience to their position. Before we get to the main event, I would like to introduce you to our event sponsor for the evening and our tour host for the location. Please join me in welcoming Marianne Young, Vice President of Advancement and Executive Director of the New College Foundation. Please come to the podium, Marianne.
Welcome to New College. We're thrilled to have you here this evening. New College is the honors college for the state of Florida. And a lot of times I'm asked, what sets New College apart? And it's really the keen intellectual curiosity of our faculty and our students. So I think this is a perfect setting because our students and faculty love to debate. So this is a great opportunity for them to see it in action this evening. Our students, a few bragging rights. Our students go on to receive more Fulbright Awards than any other university in this country. We also have a number of our graduates go on to PhDs in the sciences and engineering, and we're the third highest production of graduates with PhDs. So we're very proud of that fact. We launched a master's in data science program last year, and we graduated our first class. So we're bringing students to this community who have the knowledge and skills that I think Sarasota needs. And most importantly, our students and faculty and staff are deeply committed to our community, and they volunteer in a myriad ways and provide community service. So we're thrilled to have you here this evening. We hope you'll come to New College for other events, and we're delighted to have the Rumble here this evening. Thank you, Wes.
Marianne and I had to rehearse those kisses. I cannot tell you how many times. Good thing my wife's not here. It's off to a strange start. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you to New College. New College has been a tremendous partner and sponsor for SRQ Magazine and our programming. We've really found ourselves to be able and connected community presences, so it's been tremendous. I'm going to introduce you to my co-moderator and co-master of ceremonies, SRQ's contributing senior editor, Jacob Ogles. Welcome, Jacob. We look forward to you providing information about this topic.
Thank you, Wes. Tonight's topic some consider too hot to handle. However, the modified Oxford-style debate gives us a civil discourse designed to sway through both factual information and rhetorical skill. Tonight, our motion states, Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in the downtown development review process. Now, let me introduce you to our first team debating for the motion. We have Molly Cardamone, Stop Steering Committee member and former mayor and city commissioner in Sarasota. We have Kate Lohman, Stop Steering Committee member and Laurel Park leader. And we have Eileen Normile, a Stop Steering Committee member and a former Sarasota City Commissioner. They will argue for the motion that Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in the downtown development review process. They will try to prove that this is true. It should be noted all three founding members of STOP, a civic group created to take on the issue. They describe STOP's mission as a civic group organized to advocate for specific changes in the city of Sarasota's zoning code. STOP has asked the city to adopt public hearings for large projects, standards for wide sidewalks, and to pursue better traffic studies. Thus, those debating for the motion should be solidly in their wheelhouse. Molly, Kate, and Eileen have vigorously pointed out to us that this organization has no position on growth overall. But we want to thank you guys very much for representing the motion tonight. And Wes, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce the second team.
Thank you, Jacob. Our second team have not founded an organization called GO, but they will bring their unique assets to the table. Debating against the motion, we have Kevin Cooper, President and CEO of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. We have Chris Gallagher, partner with Hoyt Architects. And we have Javi Suarez, principal with Apex Studio Suarez. They will be arguing against the motion that Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in the downtown development review process. They are against this motion and will try to prove that it is in fact false. Our two architects will certainly have had firsthand experience with the downtown development review process. Mr. Cooper, as I said, is president and CEO of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Gallagher was the chairman of the board of the same organization. Our audience is astute, and some may wonder what the mission of that organization is. Although they are not here representing the organization, I hasten to point out they are here as debate partners. But I did think that people might wonder. The shortest version is to provide the leadership to achieve a diverse, balanced economy that enhances the quality of living and working in Sarasota County. Again, no position on growth. Of course, the debaters are not bound by the mission statements of either organization. I am sure both sides will educate us as much as they seek to sway us. May this good-natured fight to the death begin. Let's get ready to rumble!
All right. I will now invite Kate Lohman to the podium to present the opening argument in support of the motion. Kate.
Get this down to my size. Can you hear me? Thank you. So I'd like to thank you and say good evening to all of you. And actually, this meeting that we're having here tonight tells you quite a bit about public hearings. It's a public discussion with a formal structure. There's an emphasis on analysis and facts and the creation of a formal record. And that really defines a public hearing. When these elements are part of the approval process for large new buildings, it benefits both the individual citizen and the community as a whole. Today, almost all downtown projects are administratively approved with no public hearings and no commission votes. So the question that our team has to answer here tonight is really this. Since city staff is legally required to apply the code, what can public hearings add? The biggest part of the answer to that is information. Every code requires interpretation and judgment. No code is perfect. Every parcel of land has unique characteristics. And in the case of Sarasota, virtually all projects are infill. So every new project has existing infrastructure and existing neighbors to deal with. The reality is that decision makers, whoever they are, whether it's city staff, planning board, city commission, they have to exercise judgment. And the real question is, well, the reason that they're able to exercise judgment is that any project can be built in a number of different ways to code. There usually is some room for making a project somewhat more compatible. And the question then is, today, under our current system, what information does city staff have when they're exercising this judgment? Because the developer or his representative is in City Hall on a really regular basis, and the citizen is almost never there. So whose concerns do you think are going to be uppermost in the minds of the staff? And this is not an attack on city staff. It's just the reality of this kind of decision-making. When you have no public hearings, it's a one-sided discussion. For example, the Risdon project at Florida Avenue and 5th Street will forever block the garbage and fire access to the rear building at McCown Towers next door because there's a 7-foot cement balcony in the way. Now, with some difficulty, McCown Towers is dealing with that, but it could easily have been avoided with better information. And this is what public hearings are really all about. They're almost never about stopping a project. They're about making the project fit in better with its neighbors. Will the garbage be screened? How loud will the generators be? Where are the access points? And so on. Often a project can be altered to mitigate the impact on neighbors, but it's important that these issues be addressed early on before the developer's full investment has been made. The earlier those changes are made, the less expensive it is for the developer to make them. Now, opponents of public hearings will argue that developers need certainty, but certainty is a two-way street. Just as the developer has property rights, so too do the rest of us. Our homes or businesses are often the biggest investments any of us have. Simple fairness suggests that we should have a seat at the table when new developments are considered. There's also a legal side. Only when you have a public hearing at the beginning of the approval process are the citizen and the developer on a level playing field legally. Filing an appeal at the end is an expensive, difficult process. Very much so. Finally, in some cases, public hearings allow our commissioners room for negotiation, a process which staff really cannot take on. For example, when the Ritz-Carlton Beach Club was built, the commission requested and received a 6-foot public right-of-way to the beach. That right-of-way benefited neighbors, the larger community that uses it, and ultimately all property owners in the area whose neighborhood became even more attractive. Now, this is the type of community request that has real weight when it comes from our elected officials. Sarasota has rightly acquired many best of credits over the years. With public hearings, we have a much better chance of staying on those lists. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate, for the opening argument. I will now invite Chris Gallagher to the stage, who will present the opening argument against the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the first time I've personally been before a group of Sarasota residents sharing the podium with members of STOP. In both cases before, once before the Indian Beach Sapphire Shores Neighborhood Association and once before the Avalon Neighborhood Association, after the neighbors heard the other side of the story, they voted against endorsing STOP's agenda. In order to explain why neighbors, when confronted with an alternative point of view, vote against the STOP agenda, let me first read from STOP's website. I'm now quoting. In 2003, the city adopted the Dwani-inspired Downtown Master Plan. Ultimately, that plan included administrative approval and a new downtown zoning code, one that was supposed to be new urbanist, walkable, pedestrian-friendly, or so it was hoped. As part of it, buildings will be built to the sidewalk in order to engage pedestrians. The website continues. How has this 14-year experiment worked out for Sarasota? You need only visit the view to know it's a disastrous failure as far as pedestrians are concerned. And then it concludes, for a quality Sarasota, we need public hearings, both to discuss individual buildings and debate the code itself. End of quote. Now, I know that there are some people who do not like the view. They think it's too big. They don't like the architectural style. I understand that. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. It's not my favorite building in Sarasota. But to call the 14-year experiment a disastrous failure as far as pedestrians are concerned? Really? After 14 years, here's what's happened in downtown Sarasota. Downtown Sarasota Main Street now enjoys a walk score of 90. That's the 4th highest score in the state of Florida, and Rosemary is right behind at number 10. Many of our most important downtown sidewalks have been widened and enhanced. Downtown Sarasota has more street trees than it did 14 years ago. There's more on-street parking and more parking garages than 14 years ago. We have more people living downtown, and we have our very first apartment buildings in many years. We have a Whole Foods grocery and a Palm Ave convenience store. We have dozens of new high-quality restaurants downtown, most with sidewalk cafes. We have dozens of new high-quality retailers downtown, including the exclusive Dimmitt showroom on State Street, the first automobile showroom in decades. We have 2 new hotels built, with more under construction, and new downtown roundabouts offer attractive, enhanced mobility for cars, bikes, and pedestrians. This extraordinary transformation of downtown has improved the quality of life, not just for the citizens of the city, but the entire community. This new vibrancy has not gone unnoticed nationally. The last 2 years, here are some of the national accolades. Best Small Cities in America, Condé Nast. Number 6, Best Small Cities Quality of Life, Wallet Hub. Best Food Cities in USA, Condé Nast. Top 10 Happiest Seaside Towns, Coastal Living. The It City in the Sunshine State, Houstonian Magazine. Number 12, America's Favorite Towns, Travel and Leisure, Reader's Choice. If a highly attractive, highly walkable downtown was the goal, it would seem like we have hit it out of the ballpark. And by the way, have you walked past the View? For all the community wrangling over the width of the sidewalks, they are enormous. They must be 3 times as big as they were before. For several decades before the 14-year experiment began, new projects in downtown all went through a public hearing process. Here's some of the buildings that resulted. The Zenith, SunTrust, Promenade, the Broadway Promenade in Publix, Walgreens at Fruitville and 301, Kanaya, Chamber of Commerce on Fruitville. In the last 14, here's just a few buildings that were built. Citrus Square on Orange, the Jewel on Main, One Palm and the A-Loft. This brings me to our central argument, which is, there is not a shred of evidence to suggest that public hearings lead to greater walkability. Consider the list of projects I just mentioned. Think of the ones on your own. It's far easier to build the opposite case. Now, here's the thing. We agree with STOP members about the end result, highly walkable, pedestrian-friendly downtown. Unfortunately, the STOP steering committee is just dead wrong about how to keep us going in the right direction. Not one of the steering committee members has ever taken a project through the administrative process. They have no idea what it's like. They don't know which documents need tweaking. Make no mistake, we think this is really important. We all want high-quality streets downtown. Now, here are some real concrete things we can do to keep moving in the right direction. Review the engineering design criteria manual. That is the book that guides sidewalks. That could use some tweaking. Evaluate it, see what's been built so far, and invite lots of public input. Review the primary and secondary street map. That could use some tweaking. Again, invite lots of public input. Create a vision and master plan for tree-lined streets. Plenty of public input. And last, create a vision and master plan for Route 41 as it goes through downtown. Work with FDOT to coordinate the effort. Invite lots of public input. Public hearings for individual buildings do not lead to high-quality, walkable streets. They did not in the decades before the new code was implemented and will not now. Please
Chris.
do not support this mission.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. Thank you, Chris, for the opening argument. Both teams will now have 2 minutes to present a rebuttal to the opening team's opening argument. I will first invite Eileen Normile from the For the Motions team to the podium for a rebuttal to the Against the Motions opening argument. Eileen.
Yes, thank you. And just a quick correction, Chris. WalkScore rates Sarasota's Main Street as the 4th best in Florida. WalkScore is something of a realtor website. However, Smart Growth America, which is a national organization based in D.C. and advocates for smart growth, puts us on the Pedestrian Danger Index as the 10th most dangerous in the nation for pedestrians, with special notoriety, by the way, for US 41 between Main Street and the Manatee County line. I'd just like us to be really clear about a few things. Administrative approval of projects, which is approval of projects without hearings, without public hearings, is not something any city is required to agree to. It's not a property right. It's not in your deed when you purchase your property. It's an incentive. Generally, when a city confers an incentive upon a project, it gets something in return. When the city settled a lawsuit with development interests in 2002, it agreed to incentivize development with expedited review of the projects. When a city needs an extra boost to get going, investment incentives make a lot of sense. Frankly, if you're willing to invest in a city that hasn't quite taken off, you deserve a bonus. Administrative approval was that. That doesn't mean that the city should continue ad nauseum to give away incentives. The downtown is now a desirable place to build and invest. As business people, I don't think anyone here would discount their products or services when there's high demand. Why would a now successfully vibrant Sarasota continue to give away incentives when there are so many other issues left wanting? For instance, perhaps developers would be willing to provide some affordable housing in return for a faster approval process, or green space, or wider sidewalks. Well, unfortunately, we all know since the city has already given away our public hearings to create a faster approval process, there hasn't been one affordable unit actually built. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Eileen. I will now invite Javi Suarez from the Against the Motion team to the podium for a rebuttal to the For the Motion's opening argument. Javi.
Good afternoon. Well, I guess I'm one of those evil guys that works for developers and all we care about is money, money, money. In fact, I grew up here in Sarasota. I was 10 years old when I moved here from Puerto Rico. I went to Ashton Elementary School, went to McIntosh Middle School, went to Riverview High School, went to University of Florida, UCLA, and returned here to make a difference in my community. Now, our opponents would like to state that there was a taking of rights of our citizens. But in fact, the reason why the administrative review process, and let me say that again, it's an administrative review process. It's not an approval process. It's a review process to determine adjustments. When Duany put in the code, the property owners, about 1,800 of them were affected by the downzoning of their properties. And for that fact was why administrative review was put in place. Now, what can administrative review actually do? Well, it cannot take away and allow you or allow the staff to make decisions on allowed uses, maximum residential densities, max heights, or FAR. What it can do is determine dimensional standards up to 25%, placement of signs, building design standards, and so forth. And I'm quoting the actual code here, Section 14-1903. Downtown is a wide area, but because of the downtown's diversity, some sites may be difficult to develop in compliance with these regulations. The adjustment review process provides a mechanism by which the regulations of this division may be modified if the proposed development continues to meet intended purposes of the downtown zone district. It is not a taking, and it's not a speed-up process. The actual process for the public is better through the urban design studios, and approximately 460 meetings have taken place in the last 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Javi. All right. Thank you, Javi. For the next portion of this debate, myself and Wes will be asking questions to specific teams. I also want to remind the audience that we have the teams as for the motion and against the motion. And for the motion, which is Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in the downtown development review process. That's the side that Eileen, Molly, and Kate are arguing. On the other side, against the motion, we have Kevin, Javi, and Chris arguing that side. So please remember that when you guys are filling out your ballots at the end. For this part of the debate, once the question is posed, each team will have 15 seconds to choose who will answer the question, and then each team will get 2 minutes to answer the question, and the opposing team will be allowed a 1-minute rebuttal. Once the team member is selected, We ask them to approach the podium to present their response. At the end of the rebuttal, myself or Wes have the chance to ask the team to clarify a point that was made or expand on a statistic if it does not match up to the references each team provided us in advance, if needed. Let's get started with the questions. I want to direct a question towards the for the motion side. Why should neighbors have any say on what happens on somebody else's private property? So. Please.
Why should neighbors have any say? Because they have property rights too. Granted, the developer has certain rights associated with the property he owns, and the zoning code is going to be what regulates that. But the people who live next door live under the same zoning code, and they have the same rights. We have at times heard that it costs too much to have public hearings, that developers shouldn't have to carry that burden. But in fact, right now, all of us are already paying the price of not having public hearings because we don't have the opportunity to express concerns about things like where is the entrance to this, what are the traffic patterns going to be. These are issues that can really make a huge difference to people who live nearby. I really think that, well, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. That's terrible.
Can I
Yes.
jump in? Let's be really clear. Nobody's property rights are going to be taken away. At the end of the day, if there are public hearings and the city commission votes one way or the other, and let's say the developer loses, he takes it to court. His property rights are enshrined in the statutes. His property rights don't go out the window because there are public hearings. There have been many cases where the city has actually gone to court and won. The people who were protesting something that was going to be developed were actually correct. There have been, I shouldn't say many, there have been 2 or 3 in the last couple of years. But property rights don't disappear because there are public hearings. They're protected by law.
Thank you, Eileen.
All right. Let's give it a couple seconds, and then when you guys, the against the motion team, will have 1 minute to rebut. And thank you. All right.
No problem.
All right, Kevin.
Yeah, I would just submit that, yeah, property rights do not go away because there is a public hearing process, but public input does not go away because there's not a public hearing process either. The only real difference here is that you get a notice in the newspaper and you can come show up in front of some people and charge your case, but you're able to view the process of what's going on inside the development review at all times in the city. And I will tell you, email is available 24/7. City Hall is open Monday through Friday. You have access to planning department, the utilities department, the city commission, the city managers, the assistant city managers. There is nothing about public opinion that is being excluded from any of this process. And if it is, it's a flaw in those people that are managing the city and the employees. It's not a flaw in the process. So the notion is true. Property rights are not taken away, but your ability to submit your information, what you think of being a part of the process, is not taken away either. That is a misnomer. It is not fact. You can inject yourself into that process. So.
All right. Thank you. All right, and we're going to have another 2-minute question here. For the against the motion team, developments are permanent, but developers' commitment to a neighborhood can end at the ribbon cutting. Why trust or value their vision for the properties over the long term over those of homeowners who own property and will stay in the neighborhood?
We have a timer. We have 100 hours allotted on the timer.
Okay, just a second.
I'm leaving, just to tell you. I mean, I'm really interested, but not that interested.
Developments are permanent, but developers' commitment to a neighborhood can end at the ribbon cutting. Why trust or value those priorities in an application process over long-time homeowners nearby?
We might run a timer.
Well, I'll tell you that neighbors move too. I live at Citrus Square. I designed Citrus Square, so as you know, on an Orange Ave. The gentleman that developed that property bought those properties in the early part of the 2000s. He has developed the property. He is still there 8 years after that building was done. He's got the biggest investment in that property. He owns all of the retail tenants on it. He's building a second phase of that project right now. If anybody cares about that neighborhood, if anyone has fought harder on some of the city issues, it is that developer who has this huge vested interest in making sure that the people that live there are happy, that his new customers are happy, that the tenants downstairs are happy, that the retailers, the people that are coming to those retailers are happy. He's got a huge vested interest. The people that own the condos upstairs have come and gone, but he has been the person there. So again, this can work both ways, and in many cases, and again, sometimes developers do move on, but certainly in the case that I'm describing, I don't know that anyone in that neighborhood, in fact, has a bigger vested interest and a bigger investment than he's made, and has cared more about making that work. And again, as a person that was part of it and person that lives there, he is on that all the time. And if you know that neighborhood, we've certainly had some problems with. We've got the Resurrection House right behind us, and we've wrestled with issues with the police and the Resurrection House and things. And he's been in the middle of all of that, trying to make that a better place for all of us that live there, all of his tenants that are there. And again, I think that certainly goes both ways. Lots of developers live and work and own property in neighborhoods as well. Thanks.
Thank you. We're having a little bit of timer issues, but I'm following a timer up here, so even if the clock in the back isn't correct, I'll give you a verbal notice.
All right. So we'll have time for a 1-minute rebuttal from the for the motion side.
All right.
And you know what? For the clock in the back, I think the problem they're having is changing it. Why don't you just run it from 2, and then you guys know that when it hits 1, it's out. Okay.
All right.
That resolves that.
Fine.
Yeah.
I have to say that I think the format of the question suggests that you have to choose who is more committed to the community, the developer or the neighbor. And it's not an argument that I accept, because frankly I think they all are committed to the community. They may have somewhat different priorities. They certainly have different information. But I think everyone cares and is committed. One of the reasons for having public hearings is that it enables all these people who are committed to have a seat at the table in a formal structure. If people are in a position of just trying to go in and talk to the city manager about a project, or trying to figure out what's happening, trying to ask for an informal community meeting. Yes, you can do all these things, and frankly, I've tried to do them. But it does take a citizen who is really knowledgeable about how the system works, really understands the process.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, I have a couple of questions. My first question will be for the team that is opposed to the motion that Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in downtown development. So this is the team that says it should not, the opposed. If predictability is what developers desire, why not simply adhere to entitlements already in place for properties and avoid the application process altogether?
So a lot of it has been said about predictability and understanding the process. And that's true for, I think, whether you're a homeowner or you're a developer. Everybody wants to understand what value their property has, how they can turn around and resell it or keep it. So there is something to be said about predictability. There's also something to be said about the process and whether or not somebody has the right to interject themselves in the process because they feel the opinion of themselves is a little bit more powerful than somebody else's. I think all of us here care about our Sarasota. I think it's not about whether a developer or a homeowner or just a layperson cares more or less about where we live. I think it really is about the fact that we believe that there is a different process that will yield better results. And that process is already in place. For example, the Urban Design Studio is open currently and has been for the last 4 years. The Urban Design Studio has their doors open and has held over 460 meetings. Out of those 460 meetings, about 85 of them have been to inform the public neighborhood groups. 15 of them have been to CCNA. Plenty of them have been to architects like ourselves and neighborhood groups, business groups. And even STOP has been by their doors. So there is a public in place. Thank you.
Thank you. And a 1-minute rebuttal. Again, it'll probably say 2, but when it hits 1, then your time's up.
Sure. There's a lot of talk about predictability and the fact that you have had your chance to have your say when the zoning code was produced. I'm sure you were all out there, you all listened to all of the meetings, and you all had your say. Just hold this for me. Here it is. It weighs 8 pounds, and it enshrines all of your input. I hope you all know what page you're on. By the way, it's single-spaced and double-sided. Thank you. It's been about 15 years since this zoning code was approved. We're now talking about different kinds of development. We're mostly talking about infill development. Things change as the years go on. No zoning code is perfect. And as the little problems come up with each building, it can be made more perfect, and that's what the public hearings are for. However, our opponents will tell you, you've had your say, you may not speak anymore. And I may not speak anymore, evidently.
Thank you very much, Eileen, and thank you for a perfect lead into my question to your team. You've placed an enormous book on the table. There are people who say that adding an extra step in the process or another layer is just a tactic to stall the process of getting new projects built, especially when we see such a large book. What would be your answer to that critique?
I will be happy to take that question. I served on a city commission for 8 years where we did have public hearings. And while Chris sort of threw down on the fact that we built a Walgreens while I was in office with public hearings, I'd like to say that we also built the Sarah Bond, the Ritz-Carlton, Beau Ciel, the library, the Hollywood 20, all through, and many more, all through the public hearing process. The idea that people have a vested interest in this community can come forward and say, this is what I want to see in my community. This is the officials that I've elected to serve my community. And now no elected official has anything to say about a project. They never even know about the project. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from your question, but when I walk down the street and somebody says to me, how the hell did the city commission approve that building? I have to say, they didn't. They had no idea that building was going to be there, how big it was going to be, how wide the sidewalk was going to be. So we talk about predictability. Let me go to a neighborhood that I live in where 4 houses were removed and a bank building was built. The predictability that I had and my neighbors had when we purchased that land was that we would be a residential neighborhood. A great loss of predictability.
Thank you very much. And the other team has the opportunity for a 1-minute rebuttal.
When my opponents say that no one had any idea, I assume they're talking about the view again. The city really does know exactly what was going to happen. The height limit is firmly established in the code. That's what they abided by. The dimensions of the sidewalks, the minimum dimensions of the sidewalks, are firmly embedded in the Engineering Design Criteria Manual. So we know all of those things. So at a very minimum, it has to meet those requirements. So it is no mystery. The City Commission can't scratch their heads and say, oh, I didn't know they were putting an 18-story building there. That zoning's been in place for, as I say, 14 years now. So again, it'd be interesting. I've got some projects that I've been working on the last couple of years, some of which have taken 6 to 9 months to get through the permitting process. I think people imagine that this is a very simple process to get through this administrative review. It is not a simple process. It takes a long time, and there's a lot of negotiation that goes on with staff. It isn't just a rubber stamp process.
Thank you. And I think Jacob has a final question. Thank you all for answering my questions.
I'll pose this question to the for the motion side. When we've often heard complaints that public hearings can subject applications to a political process. At the same time, this city has seen city commissions that were elected that were sometimes widely viewed as pro-growth, sometimes widely viewed as anti-growth, and sometimes serving months apart from one another. How is it a protection of property rights for either the neighborhood or the developers to subject any sort of plan that could affect property values all around to political winds that can change so quickly?
I think I'm going to repeat myself here. There are political considerations at times when it reaches the level of the City Commission. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We did elect them, and they can step in and actually negotiate so that something works out for both the property owner and the people who fear they have some issues with the property. But here's where I'm going to repeat myself. The City Commission doesn't have the right to remove property rights from a property owner. If the decision of the City Commission runs contrary to what the property owner had planned, then he or she has the ability to take it to court. And they have taken it to court in the last couple of years, and they've lost in those two cases, the Ringling and the Women's Exchange. They both were found, the court found that the City Commission voted correctly. So this loss of property rights actually doesn't hold up.
If I could just add one thing too, the vast majority of public hearings are not about this profound level of property rights. They're about little things like, how loud are the generators? That was one of the biggest issues with the hospital. And it ultimately was shown that, in fact, the generators they were planning on putting in were extremely loud when measured. And it was possible, the hospital did spend a little more, but they put in equipment that was going to actually work for them in the neighborhood. So it does occasionally happen that there's a really tough project that ends up in the newspapers and you hear about it for a long time. But usually public hearings about these small things where it's possible to actually improve a project. Thank you.
Javi?
I think this is the perfect place to say this is why you should not vote for this motion. Because right now, as the code stands, everything is defined pretty clearly for you. There are some gray areas. And those gray areas is where the administrative review process comes into play. Nobody is taking any public person's right to be able to say that they don't agree with certain aspects of their neighborhoods or what they want to develop. But you don't want this to turn into a popularity contest. If your neighbor, for some reason, doesn't like you, all of a sudden, are they going to control whether or not you can add that second story on your house or not? That is a process that could potentially happen with public hearing at that level. There is a public hearing process, and it's in place already.
Thank you.
All right. I'll now pass things over to Wes, who will be handling the audience Q&A portion of the evening. So here's where you guys jump in.
Thank you, Jacob. I think that we all have seen that these are two tough teams. It takes a lot of courage to face either team. So who's feeling brave? We're going to open up a line for the Q&A. So if you have a question, we're going to start the line right here so it's nice and structured. Come and stand here on this aisle. I'm going to stand here, and we'll bring people forward one at a time. We'll get through as many as we can. About 5 people we would definitely be able to do. As it starts to pass that, it'll get harder, but we will definitely do our best to make it through 5. The questioners can all be very helpful in that process too. This is not an opportunity for a speech. This is a time to ask a question. You will hear groans and agony from the audience. If you start to make a speech, you will be shocked how sensitive they are to that. And they will vote you down. So definitely no speeches, definitely ask questions. I'll be working with the questioners. Jacob will probably steer the questions to one group or the other, or you may have a sense of who your question is intended for. And I believe the way that it's structured, just to double check, then there's rebuttals as Jacob feels is appropriate. So usually the question will also to one group will create an opportunity for rebuttal from the other, but we play this one a little bit by ear. So if you'd like to come forward and ask your question, you can say your name first too.
Thank you very much, Dan Lobeck. And you know, what we're hearing from the no side is that people have input, but it's behind closed doors. So my question is, in applying something like the general compatibility requirement of the zoning code, which the city attorney has told me applies to what's at issue, isn't it better to have that discussion out in the open where everybody can see what the comments are and hear what the comments are instead of cloistered behind closed doors with staff making the decisions in the dark?
Thank you, Dan. Which group would you like to have start that?
I think that's for the against side to address. 2 minutes.
Both sides have a chance.
Yes.
I mean, I guess the answer to that question is it presumes one thing is that the public process is not in the sunshine. It's not available for public record. You're able to review and request who met with who and discuss with them what happened. I mean, that's all public record. Any document submitted by a landowner with what they want to do with their property is all public record. You can review it. You can see it. You can meet with, like I said before, I go back to it. You can meet with staff and you can do that. So to call it behind closed doors is somewhat of a misnomer, and I think it maybe paints staff in a negative perception as if they're not sitting there listening to both sides and trying to make things work the way they're supposed to. It's not about being behind closed doors or some cloak and dagger type routine that's going on here. Staff, I assume, is acting in the best interest of what the code says. They're trying to carry it through to the best of their abilities, and so it's not necessarily a point of behind closed doors or trying to close anything. I don't know anybody that's trying to do that here, especially in such a process that is so open. And missing and sub for one meeting, like I said, you might get a public notice in the newspaper, and if you see it, you go down to a meeting and you have your maybe 3 minutes to get on the record for it. That doesn't necessarily create an open, massively open door process where someone can see the 3 minutes of stuff you had to say in the public. You can submit emails that become part of the public record. All these things are open, so it's really not a closed door process completely that one might paint it to be. It's there and it's in, and anybody, whether it be someone who's a landowner trying to do what they want to do with the property, or someone that's reviewing what's been submitted and they don't like what's being done, they all have equal access. And again, if they don't have equal access, that's not a public hearing problem. The public hearing problem may be a symptom of the larger problem that should be addressed if they don't have that access. So I don't think it's a behind closed door thing. I don't think the public's ability to place their input in the process is being hindered to the degree that one might seem if you hear this argument about the public hearing process. Your 3 minutes at a public hearing is nothing to the 30 or 40 minutes you may be able to spend with staff at utilities, at all sorts of different departments. When you add that time up, you can have a substantially more substantive input into this process other than 3 minutes that can be, to the point of the question earlier, either politicized or put somewhere else. It doesn't make sense.
All right. I'm going to give an equal time rebuttal, so 2 minutes. Right, starting now.
Okay. First of all, let's just be very clear about the difference between informal meetings between staff or with the public and staff, or the public and the developer. There's a big difference between that and having a public hearing. The difference is you can be promised the moon in a private hearing, or not the word hearing, in a private meeting with a developer or with the staff, none of it is set in stone. When you have a public hearing, it becomes legally binding if the City Commission votes for it. So if you want any kind of certainty, which is something we're all looking for here, you have to have the public hearing process, or you will never know what the end product will be until the building is built and they didn't actually do what you had discussed.
I'm just going to take this last few seconds to say that public hearings would only be applied to larger projects, so the idea that someone's house would be at a public hearing is not the case.
All right.
Please come up and join me. Come right here. And you can start, why don't you come right to here? And you can start by saying your name and then your question.
Jeanette Palladino. Addressing Kevin, who said earlier, well, you go down to City Hall anytime and go down to the Commission anytime and find out what's going on. I mean, let me ask you, am I supposed to go every single day and figure out what's going on? How am I supposed to keep up with what's going on when I'm just a normal person? I mean, how does that work? I mean, I have to go and stand by the door every day to see what's going on, what's new?
All right, once again, to the against.
I would just submit, once you know how the process works, you have an ability to check in. I mean, the public notice process is also fairly prescribed. The state has regulations, so if you happen to miss the newspaper that day and you don't catch the public hearing notice and you don't live within a certain feet of the project where they're having the public hearing, you wouldn't know either. What you have to do is pay attention to what's going on and keep up on when the hearings are taking place. But even in a public hearing process, you still have to do that. If I don't read the paper on a Wednesday and that's when the notice of the public hearing ran, by your standards, I would completely miss it and I would never know if I wasn't paying attention to it. Or if I'm not within a certain boundary of where the public notice is required to be sent out, I wouldn't know. I think it's incumbent upon people in the community to pay attention. If it's such an important issue, if this is such a critical issue, wouldn't you want to be paying attention to what's going on? Wouldn't you want to be looking at what's happening in your community? Otherwise, what's the point of all of it? If it's really not that important, we don't want to really spend time taking care of it and looking at it, then it's kind of a moot point. But I think to the question is, you know, there's ways for you to be left out of noticing when public hearings are happening too. It's not a perfect process on either side, so if it rubs both ways.
All right, rebuttal?
Sure, I'd be
just
happy.
about a minute.
We have time.
That's right. You guys still have time. Didn't know you were changing. So there you go.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point too that the whole process the city's been going through to come up with a form-based code is really to help you with that problem you've described. If we as a community could agree on a shared vision for what we want our neighborhood or our city to look like, you wouldn't have to follow the newspapers and go to every public hearing and weigh in and everything else. If you could build the kind of code where you could actually see what you're going to get down the street. You know it's going to be a 3-story building, you know it's going to be of a certain dimension and form, and it's going to meet the sidewalk in a certain way, then all of the major worries about what are the details going to be, those become much smaller items to concern themselves. So that's really what this whole process the city's going through is to get us there. So you don't have to do that.
All right.
Sure. What we lost several years ago when we did away with public hearings and everything was administratively approved is we lost one very, very important thing that you're asking about. Every neighbor involved in that piece of property being redeveloped received a notice 500 feet from that property. The president of the neighborhood association, if there was one, and there are mostly neighborhood associations, also got that. So we tried to cover a whole group of people to at least extend the word out beyond the 500 feet. Then there was a required neighborhood meeting with the developer who would go and show his plans. It didn't have to be full-blown plans. They could be on a napkin, for example. Show that plan, and the neighbor would say, I don't have a problem with that, but gosh, could you just put the driveway over there, or could you put the dumpsters back here so that I don't hear the garbage men coming in to empty a dumpster? That's what we lost. And I consider that a huge loss if you're a neighbor and you've got predictability and you've got compatibility and all the abilities that you're interested in.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to come up and join me, you can start with your name and then ask your question.
I'm Gerald Fickinger, resident of Sarasota. The question is a background question, really, not for or against and it's for the people who have been commissioners or mayors or worked on and with the commission. Has Sarasota ever, or the commission specifically, the authorities, gone to other cities and see how they work the development process? Palm Beach, Vero Beach, Naples, et cetera, et cetera.
To the foresight.
Okay. There is an organization called Florida Redevelopment Association that our commission regularly attended. At least 2 or 3 of us every year went to that conference. I remember specifically going to one over on the east coast of Florida, coming back just full of ideas that I carried to our city manager, and we actually implemented some of them right away. Our city commission from 93 to 2001 really were in the forefront of the redevelopment of our city. Then we went into the recession, and then all of a sudden there's all this money and all this interest, and this is why we're having this problem, because nobody elected or citizens have any say in what's going on. It's just happening.
I'd like to add to that part of the whole concept of administrative approval is wrapped up with the form-based code. So currently, our downtown is a form-based code, and we're talking about expanding that into the rest of the city. And I have heard some of the people who are in the opposition side essentially say, if you have a form-based code, you have to have administrative approval. That's just, it's a package deal. But in fact, that's not the case. You can have a form-based code and still have public hearings. And there are various cities that do that. For example, Arlington, Virginia, in the Columbia Pike Code has a 2-tier process where larger projects have a 50-day review process with public hearings. There's an article by the Form-Based Code Institute looking at the code, noting that there is a lot of variation depending upon what the community's expectations are for involvement by the elected officials and by the citizens.
All right, and rebuttal time? 2 minutes.
I just heard the other team say this massive problem we have. I'm not sure I understand what the massive problem is. If the massive problem is the view, I'm not sure the entire community agrees that we have a massive problem because of the view. It's exactly what the code prescribed, 18-story building. Those buildings along the bayfront have been built for decades now. They've been doing that. No one sitting here in any way had anything to do with those codes. They were written long before we arrived, and it's just the fulfilling of a vision that somebody had decades ago that we were going to have 18 stories across the bayfront. So I'm not sure what this massive problem, this urgent thing to change something, as I described to you in my opening statement, we have an incredible downtown. It's done exactly what Dwani hoped it would do. People come here from all over the country to see this downtown and go, oh my God, we have investment here, not because we have a lousy downtown, but we have this highly walkable downtown. It's done everything that it was supposed to do. What is the big problem that says that we need to change this? This is again, the central point of why are we talking about this motion? What is this major problem? Everything has become more walkable. It continues to be, and we should be on the same course.
All right.
Thank you. This is our next questioner. You can start with, I'll hold the mic. You can start with your name and speak the question. And I look forward to seeing how our debaters help use your question to influence whether people will vote for or against this motion.
Thank you. I'd like to begin first by noticing your shoes. Has anyone seen Wes's shoes?
I'd like this man to get extra minutes on his question.
You have to hold your feet up so everyone can see your shoes.
Thank you.
Brilliant fashion statement. My name is Mike Lachey, and my question is for the representatives of the developer community, the 3 men on the side of the stage. I can think of 3 cases where city planners, the ones who work with developers in administrative review, go on then to work for the development community. One prominent case is Karen Murphy, who worked for the city Then she went to work for developers, and now she's been given the task of writing our new code. I wonder how that's going to turn out. My question is, how do you feel about the revolving door of city planners who approve developments with developers behind closed doors and who then go on to work for developers?
Thank you. And Jacob, how many minutes do you give each team?
I think for that one we'll give 2 here.
We're being painted as with a broad brush, that somehow we don't care about our city because we are trying to develop it or build buildings or provide a future for our kids. When it comes to the, again, administrative review, it's not an administrative approval process. It is not a backdoor deal. No, it is not an administrative approval.
Not calling from the question has been asked, and he's answering a specific question.
Review process where there are some adjustments that can be made, okay? And whether or not somebody works in a private sector or the public sector should not be a judgment on those individuals. I know Karen Murphy personally, and she cares deeply about our city. She cares deeply about Bradenton. She worked on that code as well. Okay, so let's not judge a person because they either work for the private sector or they work for the public sector. Nobody here is trying to, it seems like it's a, you're pro-development, then you're evil. You're not for development, then you're the nicest, sweet person trying to do good for everybody else. I don't know if that's the case, but it sure seems to be the way it's being painted. And unfortunately, we do all care. That's why we're here. That's why we all came back to work here. Okay? So we should not be judged by what we do and whether we're in the private sector or in the public sector.
Okay, you get it from me in a second. I'd like to say I don't see that kind of division. I think there's always going to be shared expertise that people who are really skilled at something, in fact, are going to move from the private sector to the public sector. But the citizens deserve to be a part of that equation too. And unless you have public hearings, the citizen basically just isn't part of it. They're not in there at City Hall. They don't have a formal role to express their point of view. Also, I'd like to say administrative review by staff of the project is going to happen whether it's approved by staff or approved at a public hearing.
I would add to that administrative approval actually does happen after the administrative review. The fact is that we did form STOP because of the constant comments we were receiving about the view. But the view is there. It's built. It's going to be a great building. It's all. I personally think it's an attractive building. Sidewalks are way too small. It'd been a much better project if it were pushed back a little bit and had some landscaping. However, go across the street and look at the Embassy Suites. Huge, solid, concrete wall towering right up over the blue glass building at the corner. So there's some problems that I would take a little issue with here.
Just one more thing. As far as the architects, there's a lot of talk about the fact that they're constrained by the zoning code, that they can't do anything. They would have liked to have done wider sidewalks or had greater setbacks, but they just couldn't because of the zoning code. The only thing keeping them from requesting wider sidewalks or less height or smaller footprint is they would have to have public hearings. They would have to ask the city staff if they could possibly have public hearings and therefore do something not in the zoning code, but they choose not to.
All right. That's time.
I would like to rebut that because I have a project.
Wait, okay, well.
I have a project.
Okay,
you don't assign yourself a rebuttal.
Okay.
I'll give you 30 seconds, and if we need to come back, we will.
10-story building zoned for 10 stories, and it's a 4-story building. And it was not because we were told that we had to ask special permission. The developer felt, and the architects felt, that that was a better fit for that site. So to say that you're required to get permission to actually produce less of a size than it's in the code is not true. It's simply not true.
Did you want to ask?
All right.
I was just going to make one more comment. We had a meeting with the developers of the Quay, and as most of you know, that's going to be a very big project with lots of buildings. The developer told us that he's going to go through the public hearing process because he does not want to build to the code.
All right. Next question here.
Thank you. My name's Charlene Creel, and I'm a 13-year resident of our city. And I have enjoyed seeing it develop and want to see it develop in even better ways going forward. My question, I think, is to Javi, since you've been very vocal on that team. I believe, from what I've heard tonight, that citizen input is valued. It certainly doesn't make the decision. The code and the city staff make the decision. So it doesn't ultimately alter that decision that's made, but it's local knowledge. Local knowledge is awesome. Local knowledge can help you do wonderful things. I liken it to, you could have bought that shirt off the rack, but if you went and had it custom tailored, little extra information, little stuff in the right place, awesome result, right? So my question is, why would a developer run from just a little bit of extra attention, a little bit of extra input for a fabulous result?
All right, we're going to kick it to the against team. Okay.
That is a wonderful question, and I would agree with you that I think the public input and the local knowledge is wonderful. I would just simply, knowing the process and going through the process itself, know that those things actually do happen currently. We might look at the extremes and say the View, the Embassy. We can't regulate good or bad architecture. We just can't. We'd like to, but everybody has a different opinion. You can't regulate whether or not I like yellow, or I like blue, or I like green, or I like big, or I like small. That's why we have this wonderful country where people have opinions, and they're entitled to those opinions. And so I don't know of any developer that I've personally worked with that has run away from those type of hearings. In fact, Dr. Mark Kaufman, who's one of our biggest clients, one of the first things he does is try to sit down with the community and hear what the neighborhood wants. Okay? So I think we're both saying the same thing. I think there might be a misperception about to what extent things get inputted from the public process or don't, because we're looking at these symbols that are the extreme cases in the code. Thank you.
All right. I'm kicking over to the floor side.
I'd like to just tell you a small story that I think might illustrate the situation. I live in Laurel Park, and Jim Bridges has built a project of townhomes called the Q between Ringling and Morill. It's 40-some townhouses, I believe. Now, this was administratively approved. So the neighbors were actually very concerned about the entrance point on Morill because it's a one-way street, very small, and it was the main entrance and exit for the entire project. But there wasn't anything we could do about it. Then there was a public hearing, not about that, but about a utility easement, something that actually required a public hearing. So all the neighbors trotted in and said stuff about the road. And of course, nothing happened because that's not what the hearing was about. But the next day, Jim Bridges called me, because I was president of the neighborhood association at the time. And he said, you know what, I heard all that testimony, and I really want to have an entrance point off Ringling, but the city wouldn't let me. So why don't we go in together? And we did. The neighborhood and the developer, we went in together to the city and requested an extra entrance point off of Ringling, and they granted it, and it was better for all of us. And it would never have happened if there hadn't been a public hearing, because he didn't know that we wanted it.
All right.
I want to add a little story of my own. When I was in office, the Ritz-Carlton Beach Club was being built. They bought 2 old hotels, tore them down, had a huge piece of Lido Beach property. We asked them to give an right-of-way from the road to the beach, a public right-of-way along their border. They did it. It was called public good. The next thing, people came to the meeting and said, we've loved that tiki hut out on Lido for many, many years. Will the Ritz keep that tiki hut? And the Ritz said, yes. There you go.
All right, that's time.
Well, we're going to try and squeeze in 2 last questions.
And we might give shorter times here.
The first question, I'm very excited to bring a honored guest, my 7th grade science teacher.
All right, Frank.
So I already know his question will be about the genetics of fruit flies.
Okay. My name is Frank Levy, and I have one comment to make. I looked at and then another issue. But I looked at the closeness of the traffic to the sidewalk, and I said, I'm holding my little grandson's hand, and he happens to wiggle out, and where is he now? Because it's right up against the lane of traffic of one of the most busiest places. So that is something that, bothers me very much. The second thing is, we have a history that's not even a month old. Sarasota County Commission just had a hearing of the celery fields. And by the rules that they had, they could not have a public hearing prior to going through this the meeting where they presented what they were going to do and do the vote. And one of the comments there was, they wound up voting against developing the celery fields. I'm not going to go into the reasons for that, but the fact is, they said, we wish that we could have had the public information prior to having to make our decision, because then we could have been able to negotiate, solutions. And so, why is this bad?
Okay, why is public input bad? I'm going to kick this to both sides. Oh, wait, well, I'll kick it to the against side first.
And how long?
Considering how it's phrased. We'll just give a minute on this one.
There are plenty of circumstances in the city of Sarasota, even if you're downtown, where you will have to go to a public hearing. Every project that you propose for downtown, just because it meets the 18-story or the 10-story limit, doesn't mean that you will not end up at a public hearing. If you try to do something that is like the celery fields, out of character with the zoning that's there, you've got to go to a public hearing. If you want to change the zoning of some kind of a thing downtown, if you want any kind of a major adjustment, you've got to go to a planning board hearing. So it is not like this downtown code does not have public hearings. So I've got a project right now. In fact, a 3rd phase of Citrus Square. I've got to go to the planning board because I've got a staff member who's interpreting something different than staff interpreted 8 years ago. It seems rather minute issue, but we're going to be dragged through a much longer process because of that. So someone asked earlier too about why would you object to this this seemingly small piece of extra work?
That's time.
What's that?
We had gone with a 1-minute answer.
Oh, am I past my time?
Yeah, that's 1 minute.
Okay.
So okay, to the rebuttal.
I'd just like to say that having a requirement for a public hearing is an incentive for the developer to actually have conversations with people ahead of time. There really is no incentive for them to do that unless there are some folks, as Kate mentioned, that are just wonderful to work with, and they really want to work out any issues ahead of time, which seems like a very good idea to me. But there are some who don't. And if they are required to have a public hearing, they know that it's to their advantage to meet with people ahead of time and work out issues. And in the months I've been on the planning board, and Chris was on there for 6 years, I believe. 8 years. We've had public hearings in the planning board where the people came in and said, please approve this. They worked with us for several months ahead of time. We suggested this, they listened to us, and we just really like this project, so please go ahead and do it. So all public hearings are not contentious.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frank. And this whole process about being swayed from one position or another, thanks to Frank Levy, I will never be swayed from the fact that Pluto is a planet. I do not care what they say nowadays. The downgrading is unacceptable to me. Thank you, Frank. We'll have our last succinct question.
My name is Richard Perry, which I've been here about 6 years. My question is actually twofold. Number one, what is a larger building? What is the requirements for that? Number two, over the past 30 days, I think we've all seen where city codes and requirements have been not up to date, such as with Hurricane Harvey, and so many people having such a bad impact as a result of that. And if you've ever gone through 41 and you hit the bottleneck right there by the view, or even consider further down on 41, you drive there, out of 3 lanes, there's usually 2 lanes that are almost blocked because they're flooded. So my question is, the code review, how often is that done, and when's the next time that it's due?
All right, we'll kick it over to the... Well, we got 1 minute time for each side here, and we'll kick it over to the 4 side.
All right, well, let me just start by saying that the position STOP has taken about the size of the project where public hearings should kick in is to say we're going to stick with what the city has done and already has a code for. So prior to the adoption of Dwani, there were certain rules in place. There were public hearings for any residential project that had more than 8 units, or for a commercial project that was more than 10,000 square feet, or 5,000 square feet if it was near a residential zoning district. So after the Dwani plan was adopted, the lawsuit was settled. Downtown, we had just administrative approval, but outside the downtown, this old system was still in place. So what we're saying is, let's use that old system. We know what it is. It's tried and tested. Yeah, there may be issues about what some of the rules are about what can be built.
That's time.
And thank you.
All right. Against side?
I'm not sure what the flooding in the streets has to do with whether we have public hearings or not. But some of the flooding that you're talking about has been there long before the view was there. I will say, in terms of how often is the code updated, there was a period for several years where every 6 months, the city of Sarasota would put forth text amendments to the zoning code. And I thought it was a pretty effective process. The neighborhood groups participate in that conversation, the representatives of the chamber would be at that, and anyone else that was interested in it would discuss those things. Staff, after hearing from both sides, would then go forward with to the planning board and the city commission with recommended changes to that. We have not been doing that since we've been in the form-based code process, but I think we certainly ought to be back there so that these tweaks can be made on both sides of it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you to our questioners from the audience. Can everyone clap for them? That is really warm applause. It takes courage and it takes some creativity to come up here and ask a question. So it means a lot, and it's usually a special challenge to our members of our panel because they just don't have any idea where the questions are going to come from. I'm going to turn it back over to Jacob. Jacob, thank you very much.
Thanks, Wes. All right. We'll now give each team 2 minutes for their closing statements. This is their last chance to solidify their arguments and potentially sway your vote. And I will now invite Kate Lohman back to the podium to present the closing statements in support of the motion. Kate?
Yep, I'm just getting it back down to
give it a minute for the clock
level
to be ready, if you don't mind. This is it. This is for all the bananas.
You get 8 minutes and 6 seconds. No.
All right, I'm taking those 6 seconds.
Okay.
Public hearings yield multiple benefits. First of all, they provide decision makers with important information early in the process when it's still possible and cost efficient to make changes. Second, public hearings are about fairness. They give all of us a seat at a table, allowing developer and citizen to be on an equal legal footing, but with everyone responsible to the zoning code. And third, public hearings allow our elected and appointed officials the opportunity to negotiate on behalf of the community. All of these points serve the goal of making new buildings more compatible with the existing city, and that's really the purpose. Public hearings do somewhat increase a developer's costs primarily in terms of time, but not having those hearings incurs costs to both residents and to the community as a whole. Think of that concrete balcony I told you about. That's a dumb mistake that we're just all going to have to live with. The failure to create compatible new development ultimately has a price in terms of dissatisfied residents. And at the extreme, those residents can vote with their feet. Everyone who runs a business knows that from time to time you have to invest money to make money. Capital improvements and investments in personnel are part of the cost of doing business. Public hearings are our joint investment in the future of our community, making it a better place for all of us. And that includes the developers who build here in the future. Sarasota has a special brand. It's a known value. Now, public hearings are about protecting the underlying reality of that brand. It's not just advertising. It's something real that's underneath it. It's about keeping Sarasota a place we really all want to live. Thank you.
All right, please reset the clock. All right. Thank you, Kate. I will now invite Kevin Cooper to the podium to present the closing statements against the motion. Kevin.
Yeah, I had something else planned, but I think it's interesting. I want to touch upon something that keeps being repeated here tonight. Is about what we lost. And it's about that administrative approval isn't a right, it's an incentive, and it's this and that. And really, I think that's somewhat of a misrepresentation of history. And I think when you look at the motion, why you should be against the motion, it recalls history. I mean, this was part of the plan. Andres Duany was brought here to implement this downtown master plan, and an administrative review was always a part of it. And the interesting thing was there were 1,800 properties that were part of this sweeping downzoning. If you look at a place like Burns Court, prior to the downtown master plan, you were allowed to build up to 18 stories there. The downtown master plan proposed 5, ended up being 10. They were allowed to build 50 units an acre. Duany came in and cut that in half. They went to landowners and they took their property rights. And as a part of the plan, on the other side of it was administrative review. It was a simplified, streamlined review process. And I want to put you in the shoes of a landowner who wakes up one day and they simply cannot do with their property what they could do the day before. But part of that is, hey, beleaguered property owner, here we are, Andres Duany. Here we are, the city. Part of this plan is administrative review. This is what you get on the other side. It was not a taking from the citizenry. It was a giving to the property owners, these 1,800 properties whose rights were being taken by the downtown master plan. And what this does is propose to say, hey, you know what we want to do? We want to keep those property rights. We're not going to give them back to you. But you know what we want to do? We want to take back what we gave you in return. And that's the principle behind it. This was always a part of the plan. And these property owners are still there. And back when this process went through, the reason that lawsuit was brought up was because administrative approval did not make it into the city's comprehensive plan. It was part of the downtown master plan, and it was not brought through. That is the point here. There is a plan. It's not about predictability and fairness. It's about the point that these people were there, and they saw it, and they bought into it.
Thank you. That's time.
All right. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to both teams for your enthusiasm and your professionalism throughout this debate. I'm now going to pass things back over to Wes, who's going to talk to you about the results.
We have heard a lot of exciting and interesting opinions today, and now it is time to see if our audience has been swayed. So now it's our opportunity to vote again. When you came in, you voted either for or against our motion. I'm going to read it again. Motion. Sarasota should require public hearings for all large proposals in the downtown development review process. What we're going to ask you to do is vote. You can do it by paper or digitally. I'll give you the digital in just a second. although probably paper is probably going to be more efficient, to be honest, and less error prone. But I will give you the online site, and you are to vote for or against that amendment, or that motion. The website, if you're going to do it digitally, www.srqmag for srqmagazine.com/rumble2, and that's the numeral 2, RUMBLE numeral 2. Can I see hands up if people are doing it digitally? How many people we have using their smartphones or whatever? We do have a couple? Okay. There are some. You know, it is possible, and I'm most suspicious of people who come up with that sort of idea. You have outed yourself. Oh, does anyone need a ballot? Is there anyone who... And don't give one to him. Yes. Right. Were there hanging chads? Were there... You know, some of us remember. I think we're good. I think we have all of the ballots. Everyone's turned in your ballot. Great.
All right. We'll need some time.
So now we're going to take it into the back and run it through our super powerful supercomputer required to process the statistical complexities of this, this voting process. I'm going to take a... They are so scientific. It's coming for me. Oh, has your opinion changed? What's going on? You were Yeah. Hey! It was a plant the whole time. Yeah, we thought you might be. You weren't doing so good up here. I do want to thank Marianne, and I want to thank New College of Florida. This is an incredible venue. Oh my God, it's fantastic. This is just tremendous. Thank you so much. It could not have gone better. The facilities, the equipment, the microphones work. I can't tell you how rare that is. Oh my God. And just tremendous. Thank you very much. What a great organization. I have a little bit of stuff here that normally I talk about at the end, but I might as well do it now. I'll tell you a little bit about the Rumbles that are upcoming and the SB2s that are upcoming, if you're not familiar with them. Oops, I'm on the wrong page here. They've already voted. You can say whatever you want now. It's great. I hope to see everyone at the November SB2 Philanthropic Agenda Luncheon. Our SB2 panel discussions, I'm sure many of you have attended. They have been very well received and very successful. We're going on 3 or 4 years now. I'm not even sure how long we've been doing them. And the success has caused us to really expand them and also move them during the day. They were breakfast events, which was rough, I will say, especially as a dad with young kids. And now they are luncheons, which means come and eat. There'll be a panel discussion. We'll explore, in this case, it's philanthropic, so we'll explore the dynamic and ever-changing world of not-for-profits. What's trending? Who's innovating? Why are donor-advised funds growing so rapidly? And what exactly are donors looking for? The luncheon will then culminate in the presentation of the SRQ Gives Good Innovation in Philanthropy Award. That's a lot to say in one breath. Honoring community leaders in the nonprofit sector who are contributing to our region's philanthropic strength with their forward-thinking initiatives, perspectives, and we will also give out the SRQ Civility Leadership Award to people that are nice, not these people up here, people that are nice to each other. They were really good. Were they really good? They were really good. We'll come back to that. Give them applause for how respectful they were. They deserve it. They really were. You know, we've got riot gear in the back. I thought I might have one of those see-through plastic shields, but it didn't happen. It'll be presented to an individual who's paved the way to success. So the Civility Leadership Award, the Philanthropic Innovation Award, and also, of course, the panel discussion, that will be in November. You, of course, can find the exact dates and times on our website, SRQ Magazine, or SB2, srqsb2.com. All of that will get you there. We also are just waiting at this point. What do you all want to talk about? My daughter likes to talk about animals. Nice. Well, at this at this moment, I'm actually going to go and talk to Jacob for a minute, turn to the person next to you and have a conversation about what you've seen. It's too late to influence their vote, so it's safe to ask you to do that now.
Are we skipping the dance-off part of the competition?
What was it?
Are we skipping the dance-off part of the debate?
Yeah.
It's my favorite part, Wes. You're breaking my heart.
You got served. There'll be a dance-off. So make yourselves comfortable, and pretty soon I will come back to the podium with the results of the voting. Thank you all so very much. This is close in the hanging. This is at the hanging Chad level of close. This is shocking. Okay, so I have to read this carefully because it's statistics. At the beginning, our motion was supported by 72% of the audience. 72% of the audience supported the motion at the start. 28% opposed the motion at the start. There were 8 undecided voters. But both sides picked up undecided voters. The winning side picked up 5% of the total voters. And the opposing side picked up 3% of the total voters, which is an amazingly close shift. And the team that was for the motion wins. Each member of the winning team will be given a trophy, and No, I'm serious. We really have trophies. Congratulations. You all did amazing. A huge round of applause for our team that has come out on top. And then another round of applause for this amazing team. You guys put up a yeoman's effort. Really tremendous. Very, very good. And you did pick up percentage. So that is a very good sign. Just not enough, second place. You know what they say about that. So... And most importantly, a round of applause for yourselves, the audience. Thank you. This is amazing. Your guys' commitment to be here, tremendous. Thank you so much.